Good morning and welcome to this morning's meeting of the Audit Committee. And you're very welcome if you're a member of the public or a member of the media attending. You're very welcome to watch and listen to proceedings which are being broadcast live via Microsoft Stream. First of all, can I ask if there are any apologies or substitutes today? I don't think there are. I think everybody is present who's on the committee. Thank you. So item 2 on the agenda, therefore, is declarations of interest. And Councillor Donaldson, do you have a declaration of interest?
Yeah, very briefly, it probably won't come up, but just to say, declare interest in respect of Horsecross. Because it is referred to in one of the papers.
Thank you for that. Okay, noted. Okay, so now we're moving on to the first substantive item on the agenda.
Convener, could I just say, need a roll call of members?
Oh, beg your pardon. Thank you. Thank you. I do apologies.
No, don't.
Okay, shall we have that roll call of members now? Thank you.
Thanks, Convener. So good morning, members. So when I call out your name, if you could please confirm that you are present. So we have Councillor Drysdale, Councillor Donaldson.
Present.
Councillor Coates. I think do you have Councillor Coates? Councillor Illingworth.
Present.
Councillor McCall.
Present.
Councillor McDade.
Present.
And Councillor Williamson.
Present.
And then we also have members from KPMG and various officers from the council present.
Okay, thank you for that, and thank you, Councillor Donaldson, for reminding me. Okay, moving on to item 3 on the agenda, which is the unaudited draft annual accounts for 2019-20. And before I ask the Head of Finance to introduce this item, I appreciate that there has been some discussion over the process for considering the accounts this year. The Head of Finance wrote to the Vice Convener and myself in advance, noting that while the accounts deadlines have been extended, his advice is to try to complete this work in as normal a timescale as possible to allow officers to focus on the considerable financial challenge arising from COVID-19. I understand that this approach has been discussed with KPMG and that most councils in Scotland are aiming to complete their accounts as normal. The unaudited accounts were therefore submitted to our external auditors on 29 June, rather than first being considered by this committee as has previously been the case. Both Councillor Donaldson and I agree with this approach, and as set out in the covering report, the Audit Committee is required to consider the unaudited accounts by 31st August. And obviously we are well within this timescale. As convener, I am content that this does not affect the committee's role in considering the accounts, and I look forward to receiving the external auditor's report in due course. So with that preamble, I would now ask Mr. Mackenzie to introduce this item. Mr. Mackenzie.
Thank you, Convener. I'm conscious that one elected members indicated they wish to make a comment.
I'll get used to this yet. Councillor McDade.
Yeah, thank you very much, Convener. Yes, I just wanted to comment on what you were talking, that you were saying there, as one of the elected members who raised concerns at full council and in the elected member sounding board. That whilst I don't think any of us felt there was anything sinister or anything trying to be hidden or anything like that, it was more of a point of process, and the fact that we felt that given virtual meetings were already happening, have been happening for months, that a special meeting of the Audit Committee should have been scheduled ahead of the deadline to allow to follow the standard process where this committee would have authorised the head of finance to sign off the accounts before submitting them. It wasn't anything other than that, but that we felt, from point of view of good governance and strong governance, that actually by the time this issue arose, virtual meetings have been standard for months now, and that it would not have been an issue to hold a special meeting of the Audit Committee as we are now doing, and it could have happened 3 weeks ago before the accounts were due to be submitted. So that was more of the point. It was not to say that we don't trust officers or anything like that. You know, we have full faith in Mr. Mackenzie and his team, but it's about a point of governance and process, and actually that was the point that we were making, and I still stand by that point and still think this committee should have met 3 weeks ago.
Okay, thank you, and your comments and points are duly noted. And Councillor Donaldson.
Yeah, just briefly to say, first of all, the unaudited accounts, from my understanding, have been on the Perth Kinross website since the 1st of July. Normally we do have an audit committee before the accounts are submitted to the auditors, but that's not mandatory, and I think that's been made clear. Indeed, we don't have to submit until the 31st of August. I think we're well within that timeline. So I hear what's being said about governance and process. It may well be, and hopefully next year we will go back to previous practice, but I think actually, given the circumstances, I think genuinely what the finance team have done is actually been admirable, and I think we'll have more ample opportunity to consider the accounts today. Yeah.
Thank you, and you know, I would just add, whilst obviously in an ideal world we would have had the meeting at an earlier stage, nothing is lost here, because we now. Firstly, we have our external auditors participating in this meeting and listening to this conversation and any questions, etc., that follow the presentation of the report. So, you know, I don't feel that anything has been lost, but as I say, ideally, you know, we would have had the meeting in the normal time frame. But I think we are where we are, and we now need to move on. But I appreciate Councillor McDade's comments and Councillor Donaldson's as well. Thank you. So, Mr. Mackenzie, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, councillors. And just to touch on what Councillor Donaldson has just referenced, as members will appreciate, the unaudited accounts for 2019-20 have been prepared in very different and challenging circumstances. And I would like to begin by thanking my own team, colleagues from across the council and partner organisations for their support. I would also acknowledge my thanks to our external auditors for their advice in helping to prepare for what will be a different audit experience, both for the council and for KPMG's own team. The accounts have been prepared in accordance with the 2019 Code of Practice and the 2014 Local Authority Accounts Regulations. As noted, the accounts were submitted to our external auditors on the 29th of June, and the period of public inspection concluded on the 21st of July. The unaudited accounts require to be considered by those charged with governance at the meeting to be held no later than the 31st of August, and consideration of the unaudited accounts by the committee today meets this requirement. The regulations also require an annual review of the council's system of internal control, and the annual governance statement will be considered by the scrutiny committee on the 5th of August. It is anticipated that the draft unsigned audited accounts for 2019-20 and KPMG's draft report on the 2019 audit will be submitted to the committee at its meeting in September. I would, however, add the caveat that current circumstances may impact on reporting dates. The financial performance of the council in 2019-20 is reflected in the unaudited statements, as summarised in the management commentary on pages 14 to 25 of the agenda pack, or 1 to 12 of the accounts for those elected members working from a printed copy. This is followed by the annual governance statement on pages 26 to 31 of the agenda pack. There are significant differences between the presentation of information in the accounts and the proper accounting practice, and the basis used to monitor and project revenue and capital expenditure throughout the year. In particular, there are differences between our funding of capital expenditure and pension costs, and the Council is required to account for capital and use of assets and pension benefits and liabilities. The accounts also reflect timing differences between receipt and application of grant income. Turning to the management commentary on pages 14 to 25 of the agenda pack. The main variances on revenue expenditure on a cash equivalent basis are summarised in the table on page 18 and detailed in pages 18 to 19, that's pages 5 and 6 of the accounts. The net cost of services is just over £295 million, which represents a positive variance of £12.2 million. This includes an overspend of £1.2 million in health and social care expenditure funded by the Council, which requires to be met from reserves. Other movements bring the total underspend to £13.9 million, with just under £2 million being added to General Fund reserves. Subject to audit, the uncommitted balance in General Fund reserves at the 31st of March 2020 is therefore £12.921 million, or 3.7% of the net 2021 revenue budget. This represents an improvement in the Council's uncommitted reserves. Total gross expenditure on capital in 2019-20 was £77.7 million, comprising £25.5 million of expenditure on the housing revenue account and £52.2 million on the General Fund on various projects including roads infrastructure, affordable housing, placemaking, flood protection, the creative exchange and improvements to the Council's property and schools estate. A further £33 million was incurred under a design, build, finance and maintain contract for Bertha Park Secondary School. The management commentary reflects on the financial outlook and risks facing the Council, and the recent impact of COVID-19 on the wider Scottish economy, as well as on the Council's own expenditure and income, represents a significant new additional risk facing the Council. The balance sheet on page 37 of the agenda pack, page 24 of the accounts, shows the resources of the Council and how these are financed, reflecting the Council's overall financial position at a point in time. Subject to audit, the Council's net assets in the balance sheet have increased by £13 million to approximately £558 million as at the 31st of March 2020. There is an increase of £57 million in the valuation of property, plant and equipment, arising largely from continued capital investment. The increase in current assets of £159 million in respect of short-term investments in cash and cash equivalents largely reflects the PWLB borrowing undertaken earlier in the financial year as interest rates fell to historic lows, and is offset by a corresponding increase in the Council's long-term borrowing liability. Also included under long-term liabilities is the Council's net pension liability, which is estimated at £121 million as at the 31st of March 2020, an increase on last year of £2.9 million. The pension liability is one of the most significant and variable entries in the balance sheet. The valuation of the Council's share of Tayside Pension Fund assets at the 31st of March 2020 reduced by £46 million due to volatility in the financial markets post-lockdown in mid-March. The estimation of the Council's pension obligations, however, also reduced by just over £43 million, reflecting changes in the financial assumptions on future inflation, pay and pension increases. The unaudited financial statements for 2019-20 include the group accounts, which incorporate the Council's interest in Culture, Perth Kinross, Live Active Leisure, Horse Arts, Tayside Contracts, Tayside Valuation Joint Board and Perth Kinross Integration Joint Board. There are also statements of the Council's charitable trusts and common good funds. The remuneration report, which includes information on senior councillors and defines senior officers, also forms part of the financial statements and is separately audited. Both colleagues now would be happy to take questions, Convener.
Sorry, I appear to have been muted there. There we go. Bear with me a moment, Councillor Donaldson. So thank you very much, Mr. Mackenzie, for your report, which is hugely appreciated. And can I just, on behalf of the committee and indeed all elected members, pass on the thanks of us all for the amount of work that you and your team have done in order to prepare the accounts in amongst the COVID response that has been going on across Perth and Kinross Council. Your efforts are hugely appreciated. So thank you for that. So if I may, I will now move on to questions, and Councillor Donaldson is first up with a question on pensions.
Right. Stuart, I'd indicated to you in advance that I would ask about this. It's on page 48 of the accounts, page 61 of the pack, and it shows the position Perth and Kinross Council's share of Tayside pension funds assets at 31st March, and it shows on equities a fall of 11% to 489.8 million. What I really would like to know is just assurance, given the volatility in markets at that time, and I think the FTSE 100 was down not 11%, but it was down something like 21%. Are you comfortable with the figures in that kind of segmental analysis on that page? And the same with the auditors. Clearly I'm aware you're totally dependent on the figures provided to you by Tayside Pension Fund, and I'll come back with a supplementary. Okay, thanks, Stuart. Thank you,
Councillor Dawson, and as you noted, you had provided prior indication that this was an area you had interest in, and I appreciate your background and expertise in these issues. If I can just very briefly comment, I attended a meeting several weeks ago which Fiona Cordiak, who is the Director of Audit Services at Audit Scotland, was commenting on potential issues in the final accounts, and one issue Audit Scotland were looking for clarification and clarity on from councils was that the valuation took place on the 31st of March 2020, rather than, as has previously been the case, estimated at February and roll forward to March, simply because of the volatility you alluded to. So I can confirm, as far as I am aware, that evaluation has been undertaken at the 31st of March and should reflect the movements in asset values which you alluded to. The other thing is that we undertake a test, an internal review of the position based on the information available on some nationally published metrics. And what I would say is that the movement in asset values for the pension fund reflects, generally speaking, the movements we've seen in the valuation of assets for the council's charitable trusts. There's obviously an order of magnitude between those two things, but in terms of asset values, that's broadly speaking a kind of similar movement. And I suppose the third reassurance is that this is a discussion we have every year of our external auditors who have access to expert advice and who are comparing evaluations across many local authorities centrally. So as part of the dialogue we have with our external auditors on the audit process, we also gain some reassurance and input through that exercise.
Just to follow up, it does strike me then that clearly the fund must have outperformed, and I think FTSE 100 was down about 35% at its very worst, just about 10 days before the 31st of March, and then did recover. But can I take it that if that is the case at the 31st March 2020, it's important because it's also the date that's taken for, and I've also indicated in advance to you about the triennial review. And it's not so much the pension liability, which in some ways is an accounting arrangement. Well, it's a bit more than that, but it does matter. But it's future funding of Tayside Pension Fund, and we're one of the lowest funded at present, I think 17%. And the concern is for next financial year and the year beyond that and beyond that, we may have to increase from 17%. So is any indications on the timeline? I would assume we're not going to know anything before we go into the budget setting process this autumn.
Not formally, Councillor Donaldson. So the timeline is that, as you say, the triennial revaluation of the fund is undertaken at the position is at 31st of March 2020. That will inform the actuary's recommendations on employer contributions to maintain the solvency of the fund. That report will be issued next year, so it normally takes some time for the evaluation to be undertaken. Given the impact, which you rightly point to, of a potential impact on our own costs in terms of employers' contribution rates, I would hope that there would be perhaps some dialogue on this point in advance of that, so if there was anything which needed to be reflected, and we'd have an opportunity to do so. But I really can't comment much beyond that. To give a sense of the potential impact of the issue, my understanding, and bear in mind that we're only looking at non-teaching staff pensions here, been a substantial increase in contribution rates for the National Teachers Scheme in the current financial year, but broadly speaking, a 1% increase in our employers' contribution rates would equal £1 million of additional pressure.
Okay. Thank you very much, and thanks for those responses, Stuart. And the reason I have asked is it is such a big ticket item, and I know it can be technical, but it does matter without any doubt, and it's quite a big swing item. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Donaldson. Thank you, Stuart. The next question is from Councillor Williamson on council tax.
Thank you very much, Convener. My question is on page 92 of the report, 72 of the audited accounts. It's about the provision for bad debts. I note it's doubled since 2018. Is there a specific reason for that, and what is our undertaking for non-domestic rates? How much are we actually getting in? What percentage are we actually getting in?
Okay, thank you for your question, Councillor Williamson. I'm going to afford the opportunity to colleagues to perhaps provide an answer. I don't know if my colleague Mr. Walker can provide a response. Mr. Walker.
Thank you, Councillor Williamson. So in terms of council tax, you're absolutely right. The level of write-off in last year was higher than the previous years. But that's because there was considerable work undertaken throughout last year to make sure that we are as up to date as possible in terms of individual customers' accounts. You'll be aware that through the prescription of debt, if we do not keep in touch with customers, we lose the ability to collect that. So a consequence of that is that we've identified more debt that needed to be written off, and that's why the figures were more last year. As we state every year, we still intend to collect the debt. You know, if more information comes to light, we will carry on collecting the debt. The write-off figure that's included in the accounts is for accounting purposes or for bookkeeping purposes. So we will endeavour to collect that money.
Is it okay to ask a follow-up, Convener?
Of course, when you go.
Yeah, what is our actual collection rate on non-domestic rates? I know it's quite high for domestic rates, but what about non-domestic rates?
Traditionally, we'll come back to the exact figure, but traditionally we're in excess of 99% of non-domestic rates collected in year, but we'll get the exact figure for you. The council tax figure is included in the accounts because that's one of the statutory PIs that we're required to publish. NDI we're not, but I'll come back to you with the exact figure, but I think it's about 99% of in-year collection.
Okay, and for the minute, therefore, if we can ensure that figure is included in the minute. Thanks. Councillor Williamson, you wanted to follow up? Yes,
I do. It's actually on page 93 of the report, 80 on the other, on the accounts. It's about, there's a list of rateable subjects and values. And I know when you look at it, there's very slow movements between each of these. And I was wondering about the long-term trends of how things are actually moving over a longer period. And would that, when we're coming to set policies, etc., on pressures of markets, etc., it would be probably better to see those figures as a longer term figure rather than just a year-on-year figure where movements may be very minimal.
So I'm not sure if there was a question there.
Yeah. I was also wondering what. So I do apologise, Convener. I was also wondering what are those longer-term trends within that. I mean, whilst we're seeing for a year-on-year figure, I just wondered what are the longer-term trends. For example, with people letting out their homes for as holiday lets in areas. Or shops closing. We're constantly being told the amount of shops that are closing. You know, it was just trying to get a grip of what are the long-term trends here within these figures.
So this information comes from Tayside Valuation Joint Board's non-domestic rates roll. You're absolutely right, it is historic information. We don't have information from them looking forward. However, I mean, we could have a conversation with them to get a sense of what they're seeing coming through. I don't think they would have too much into the future, but we can certainly do some analysis of previous years to give you a picture, because you're absolutely right, the figures do not change very much between years. That's something it's been consistent over a number of years.
Okay.
Convener.
Thank you. Councillor McDade.
Thank you.
I have a bit of connection difficulty there.
And it's around the management commentary on pages 22 and 23. Obviously, you talk about the financial outlook, risks and plans for the future, and also about transformation in the Perth Kinross offer. Now, given the significance being placed on the offer by the council, and the potential significant financial implications it has for the council, I think it's appropriate to ask what involvement the finance team has had in terms of planning for the offer, because obviously if it's going to have significant financial implications, this is going to have ramifications on large swathes of the council's budget. So can you provide a bit of context around what involvement the finance team has had in terms of planning for the offer?
I can thank you, Councillor McDade, for your question. So I'm part of the executive officer team, and the discussions around the offer and the kind of build up of the offer has been discussed at executive officer team, so I'm certainly aware of it. I think one of the, to answer your question directly, at this point in time, beyond identifying budget provision for the engagement aspect of the offer, I think we are maybe at too early a stage in terms of that discussion with communities around about what the shape and the form of council service delivery in the future would be. But as you noted, I would expect that to have significant financial impact. The other side of that equation, perhaps to answer indirectly, would be around about participatory budgeting and how resources are made more directly available or perhaps more directly influenced by discussions with communities. And I know that you have an interest in that area. So I think we're at a relatively early stage in the planning for that, but my expectation would match yours that will have an impact on our budget going forward.
A supplementary, if I may. Thanks, Stuart, for the answer. So I think that does that is where I felt we were probably, and I think that it is.
I think you appear to have frozen, Councillor McDade. Let's bear with you for a moment. Councillor McDade has indicated that he's having some connectivity issues, and of course, as luck would have it, it seemed to have struck at the very wrong moment. Can I ask officers if there's anything that can be done in the short term to assist this? If not, then I think what we need to do is to see, first of all, if there are any other questions, and we can perhaps come back to Councillor McDade if he can dial in. Oh no, there we are. Good morning again, Mr. Councillor McDade. You froze with your mouth open. You'll be delighted to know. Can you continue where you left off, just at the start of your supplementary? Sorry, you're now on mute, or you're. Well.
I'm gonna switch my camera off, see if that actually helps the signal. So thank you. Sorry, Stuart. I think what you said there, your assessment is very similar to what my feeling was about the current situation, and I think that it would be appropriate for finance to be more heavily involved in the offer. It might not normally be the sort of thing that the finance department might be involved in, but I think actually, given the significance on budgets and the significant governance implications that fall from that, it would be appropriate for finance to be involved in that. And I think, touching on what the paper touches on around the COVID-19 situation, obviously what we're all aware of in terms of the cash flow situation that has fallen from that, and the likely implications of that in terms of mid-year accounts this year. I think from my point of view, I would quite like to see a much stronger involvement from finance, almost in every aspect of what the council is doing, as opposed to just an accounting thing, but actually how are we proactively planning going forward, because I think we're going to have to become a lot more reactive in our financial management, and budgets and things are going to have to move a lot faster. And I think what you touched on about the communities is going to be quite an interesting thing, because this is not something that Perth and Kinross has done in the same way that other councils have perhaps done. So some of the councils up north at Highland, Aberdeenshire, etc., have area committees where they already have a level of devolved budgets, and that's a long-standing thing. We don't have quite the same level of practice at that, and I think that that we're going to have to sort of find a way that works for Perth and Kinross, but also we are obviously weaving in recovery and renewal into that. So I would quite like to hear what your thoughts are in terms of the recovery and renewal and the offer, in terms of how they are going to weave into the coming year's budget, because obviously the recovery and renewal is due to come for council approval shortly. What is the impact you see that having in this period coming forward?
Okay, Mr. Mackenzie.
Thank you, Councillor McDade. I'm reflecting on your question, and I would agree with many of the points you've raised. Certainly, I don't feel that finance is in any way excluded from the discussion. We are working with colleagues around these issues, and there's a number of work streams coming out of recovery and renewal over the next few weeks, which we'll be involved in. I'm not sure I can give you a fully considered answer at this point in time. What I would say is that we're certainly looking at our own processes, and if there's learning from other organisations which is evidenced you'll change, then I know that our Chief Executive will be enthusiastic about that, and I'd be keen to learn from that experience.
Thank you. I think that's it was a bit of a difficult question for you to answer. It wasn't one that I necessarily expected to have a full answer on the now, but I think it will be something that will come up regularly at this committee from now on, basically. I think that it's something we will need to focus on more and more, particularly given the way the offer is likely to be implemented. There will be a much stronger need for a much greater scrutiny from the Audit Committee on council finances, because of it being in a less structured is perhaps not the right word, but I think you might get the feeling for what I'm trying to say in terms of it won't be the same way it has been managed in the past. It will be a lot more fluid, and therefore there is a greater level of risk attached to that, and therefore we will need to scrutinise that risk in a much more close and perhaps pinpointed manner as well.
Thank you, Councillor McDade, and I agree that the role of the Audit Committee going forward is something that we'll come on to in later items on the agenda as well. So, but your points at this time are noted. In terms of the paper before us, which is a retrospective look as well at the unaudited accounts that have been sent forward to KPMG. Can I ask if there are any other questions? There are none noted on the chat at the moment. Final opportunity for any questions? No. Otherwise, okay. At this stage, can I just simply ask that the committee note that it is anticipated that the unsigned audited annual accounts will be considered by the Audit Committee on the 16th of September. I'll take that as agreed unless anybody speaks up. Noted and agreed. Thank you, Councillor McCall. Okay, thank you for that one. And if I can now move on to item 4 on the agenda, which is the Perth Kinross Council Interim Management Report and Audit Status Summary for the year ended 31 March 2020. And we have Michael White and Christopher Windia from our external auditors, KPMG. And Michael, can I ask you to speak to this report, please?
That's no problem, Chair. Thank you. I'll just refer to the page numbers within our document, if that's okay. It's a relatively short paper, and this follows the completion of our interim audit testing. So to date, that is largely a consideration of the processes and controls within the council and an update of our planning, rather than an audit of the financial statements which have been provided to us, though it is useful to have them because we're able to use the numbers within it to plan our work that will be conducted later in the year, about the substantive testing of the numbers. Therefore, the report mainly provides the conclusions and detail of the controls that we tested, a small number of recommendations which arise from that, and an update on our approach in respect of best value and the wider scope responsibilities that we have under our appointment and the Code of Audit Practice from Audit Scotland. Pages 4 to 7 then within our report, it provides the detail of those controls that we looked at. That's largely consistent with the controls we've looked at in previous years and is a number of positive conclusions. In respect of bank reconciliations, first of all, our testing did note that there was one reconciling item which arose in late in 2019 and wasn't ultimately reconciled and concluded until mid-February, so we have a small recommendation there around timeliness. We've reviewed revenue and capital budget monitoring, consider it to be satisfactory, but of course, as you'd expect, we will be increasingly interested and focused on considering the Council's monitoring of the COVID-19 impact and what that means both in the short and medium term for the Council. We conduct relatively large samples of testing in respect of expenditure for authorisation, 40 items there, all satisfactory. And related to the fraud risk that we presume exists in respect of expenditure, we also tested a number of instances of procurement. That's looking at tender arrangements for compliance. And again, across 15 instances, we have a satisfactory conclusion. In respect of general expenditure, we test BACS authorisation. Associated with the potential fraud risk with BACS, which has arisen in other local authorities, we have tested a number of areas of BACS controls continue to recognise the strengthening arrangements and environment management have put in place there, but we do continue to raise the point that there is potential for potentially very senior privileged staff in terms of privileged system access to be able to override the controls that have been implemented, accepting that at this, when you get to that point, it's very difficult to further implement controls which would fully mitigate the risk. Nonetheless, we do highlight that we consider there potentially is a small risk remaining there. Across other controls related to payroll and pensions, our testing was satisfactory. And we also make a number of tests in respect of the application and award of reliefs for housing rents, council tax and non-domestic rates. And we have a few recommendations across those areas, largely related to evidencing segregation of duties where reliefs are being approved, and also the process for reviewing reliefs which have been applied to accounts for more than 1 year to make sure that they remain valid. You'll see within the later part of our document the management responses on those recommendations. I am satisfied with them, and in some cases it's interesting to note that management don't intend to implement anything further. That's not unusual, and if that is the approach, then we'll be content with that, but it's still useful for members to note the point that we've made and management's response. And also in a couple of areas we've provided an update just to note that as part of our year-end testing, we intend to further follow up the processes that are in place and to make sure that we fully understood any mitigating controls which might exist. That's really something we would ordinarily have done, but given the fact that we've all been working remotely through this period, it's probably just been a little more difficult to fully bottom them out and make sure that we have fully understood everything. So I just wanted to put a placeholder there to say we will revisit it, come back to it. Very last point is just that we've given the update there on best value. Largely, our work this year will be a follow-up of the full best value audit report recommendations to understand the process the council is going through, but that won't be until year end, so nothing really further to say on it at this point. I won't go through the recommendations in detail, but my colleague Chris is happy to take questions on those and myself on the rest of the report.
Thank you, Michael. And first of all, apologies for calling you Michael White rather than Michael Wilkie. I do apologise for that. Okay. Are there any questions from colleagues on the KPMG report? Yeah, Councillor McDade.
Well, yeah, thank you, convener, and thank you, Mr. Wilkie, for your praiseworthy report there. My question is really around, you talk a couple of times about privileged system users and sort of senior staff. Can you give, or Mr. Mackenzie perhaps, an idea of the number of staff we're talking about here who have this sort of level of privileged authorisation?
I'm not sure I can give the detail, but just as context, we don't at the council undertake an audit of the general IT controls. That's something we sometimes do in audits, but we've chosen not to for the council because our experience is not just at Perth Kinross, but across a number of our not-for-profit bodies. The bar is so high in respect of the controls we would require to be in place for us to rely on IT environments fully, that we find that it's very rarely actually implemented to that extent in the bodies we audit. And so we find it more effective to use alternate audit procedures. But very specifically in respect of BACS, we did consider privileged users. I don't know if Chris, who joins me, knows how many there are, or if officers know the answer to that question.
Christopher, are you able to add anything there?
Yes, we discussed with Mr. Mackenzie and Mr. Walker, and through that discussion we understand that it is very much a handful of people. It could be up to 3 or 4 from our understanding.
I think Mr. Walker wants to come in with a comment at this point as well.
Yeah, I was just going to add to what Mr. Wingate says. Basically, there are 3 or 4 super users or privileged users who are able to access this information, and any tasks that they carry out automatically generates emails to senior members of the finance team so that we're aware of what's going on. This is a recommendation that we've put in place through the work with KPMG. It's an area we've strengthened over a number of years, and we welcome their work in that area.
That's helpful, thank you. Does that answer your question, Councillor McDade?
It does actually, and I think I just sort of to slightly follow up on what Mr. Walker just said. I mean, that sounds like a very open and transparent system. So just to make sure I'm clear, then basically, if they undertake actions using these special powers, as it were, that it's essentially like an open and transparent system where you can see everything that they have done under their transactions. So essentially, it's, you know, whatever the 3 or 4 people who are getting these emails are able to see everything that they've done. Is that right?
Yeah. So there are some transactions that if they're carried out, an automatic email is generated and it's sent across finance, and there's a central log of all of those adjustments maintained within finance so that it's available for inspection at any time.
And just to be clear though, the recommendation and the observation that we're making in our report is that, notwithstanding that is an enhancement of the control environment and a strong detective control, we consider that there may be a risk, and I wouldn't want to be as categorical as saying that it is a risk. There may be a risk that those users are so privileged that they could, in theory, modify the system and, in fact, that control in order to some way bypass it or stop those alerts or logs being created or showing a specific action that they have undertaken.
So, essentially then what you would be advising would be to put in place essentially a further control whereby perhaps people from IT or whatever would be required to change those powers to stop those alerts. Is that what you're suggesting?
I think it would have to be something in that order, and it becomes really quite difficult from experience, I know, to implement that level of control because it often means revoking access privileges for certain staff and then reinstating them, and that can either interfere with their day-to-day business or indeed it just moves the risk up a tier if you are not in fact already at the top tier, and therefore there is always some risk that there will be users who are so privileged that they will be able to override controls or modify them. We really just want to point out that we think that may still exist. It may not be one that ultimately can be cost effectively mitigated or fully mitigated.
Okay, thank you for that. And I think what's clear from that discussion is that that as an organisation and as external auditors, obviously we're extremely risk aware, and that is a very good thing. And you know, we understand that you cannot, without extreme cost, completely eliminate any risk whatsoever, but that the risk is very front and centre, and we understand that the measures that are currently in place are strong, but they're not 100% watertight, and they couldn't be 100% watertight without potentially considerably additional costs. Would that be a fair summary, Mr. Wilkie?
Yes, I agree with that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McCall, you have a question on BACS.
Yeah, I was on backs. Predominantly, most of it has been answered, but I would imagine the amount of backs payments will increase considering the move that there's been away from cash payments. And would that intensify the risk, or would we say that the risk would pretty much be the same if there had been an increase in back payments? To whoever wants to answer that question.
Is that possibly something for Mr. Walker?
Well, I'm not sure if that's something that would happen with an internal issue, whether that would be our own officers that would need to do that, or whether the auditors agree that that would be an increase in risk with the increase in the number of backs payments going up due to a cashless society. So whoever wants to answer is where I'm going.
Looks like Mr. Walker seems to have volunteered.
Thank you for the question. I was just going to add that another area we've strengthened in terms of our electronic payments is we've recently invested in a system called AP Forensics. So what that allows us to do is that allows us to sense check all of our backs payments before we make payments. So it's going away doing checks on bank accounts. It's going away doing checks on duplicate payments. So It's obviously an area of growth as we move to a more electronic method of payments, but it is an area we recognise and an area we are strengthening our checks in.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Councillor McCall?
Yeah, most of it has been answered. I was just concerned that with an increase in BACS payments, would this increase the risk? Not really got an answer to that, but I understand that we have mitigation in place, and I accept that we're doing as much as we can and continuing to run the business that we do. So I'm happy with that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And now we have a question from Councillor Donaldson on procurement. Councillor Donaldson. Do we have Councillor Donaldson? We appear to have lost Councillor Donaldson at the wrong moment.
Can you hear me? No.
I can hear you now, Stuart.
Yes. It's going back and forth between mute and unmute. I don't know what's happening. Right. On procurement, the interim audit report is quite clearly satisfactory, and it's based on a sample of 15 contracts. What I would like to ask KPMG is, in your testing that you carried out, did you also look at the position of when contracts are awarded, of those contracts? I think it's, if it's over 50,000, have to be disclosed, have to be published on the public website. And the reason I ask on that is, I think it's about 1.5 years ago, and maybe I should have done a bit more research on this, but I certainly remember out of a much smaller sample, it's something like 7 or 8, we found that those 2 contract awards had not been published within the 30-day, I think it is, period. One, in fact, had been as much as 6 months. And, you know, there's issues of disclosure here to external parties. Is that something you've looked at? Michael.
Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. We certainly looked at whether the contract was subsequently published on PCS or the European Union's tender website. We didn't look at the deadline on the publishing, though, of whether it was published within the allotted time. It wasn't something that we considered to be a significant risk in terms of our financial statements audit, but it might be something that council officers consider as part of their procurement work each year.
I think it is, I'm just looking for reassurance here, because certainly 1.5 years ago, I think it really was, it stood out. On a very small sample, we had 2 awards, and they not only had not been published in the allotted time, but were significantly beyond what I think is the 30-day period. And it's something you have to follow up on from that time.
Yeah, and I think that's a valid comment, Councillor Donaldson. It's but I think if I'm understanding Christopher correctly here, whilst it's in terms of normal audit work and audit review of procurement, is absolutely a valid issue to examine and provide assurance on. But in terms of the purpose of this report and the financial status of that report, I think what he's saying is that that hasn't been covered on as part of this report, but it's a very valid point to be looked at during future reviews under the audit plan.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. So I'm not seeing any more questions on the chat at the moment coming up. So unless there are any last minute questions again, can I thank Michael and Christopher for their comments. You're free to go on with your day and get out in the sunshine if you happen to have any, wherever you are, if you so wish. Or you're welcome to stay, obviously. So thank you for that. And can we agree to note that report? I'll take silence as agreement. Thank you. Okay, and now we move on to item 5 on the agenda, which is a verbal update on internal audit by our Chief Internal Auditor, Jackie Clark. Jackie, over to you.
Thank you, Convener. I felt it would be helpful for me to highlight to you what internal audit has been up to in the last few months. Since the last audit committee, internal audit has been supporting the council to achieve its objectives, which is in line with the public sector internal auditing standards. There's some specifics that I'll pick up on later or as part of the next item on the agenda. I would highlight that there was a pre-agenda for the meeting which was due to be held in April, which would have had some reports considered at that meeting. Since then, we have not finalised any internal audit reports, although work did continue until the close down on some aspects of internal audit work. Since the commencement of the COVID-19 pandemic, all planned internal audit work has been paused. This was to enable the council to focus on delivering the key services during the pandemic, and internal auditors have been retasked to support these efforts. However, they've not undertaken any work which would have a significant impairment on their independence or objectivity once normal service resumes. Furthermore, internal audit have not undertaken any work in relation to ensuring that any agreed actions, previously agreed actions, have been implemented, again for the same reasons. What internal audit has been doing has been providing input, advice and guidance on the changing control environment as the critical friend or in a consultancy style role, and we will continue this going forward. This has also included not just for the council but also for the Health and Social Care Partnership. We are now reviewing the draft reports that have been prepared and working towards concluding all activity for 2019-20. And for that internal audit plan, with a view to bringing these reports to the next meeting of the audit committee. It's also anticipated that the internal audit plan for the remainder of 2019-20 will also be considered at the next audit committee, and that will take account of the work that will be required to support the National Fraud Initiative, specifically including work around the COVID-19 grants, which we have had an oversight of, particularly with regard to attempted frauds, and that will continue and that will be included within the next internal audit plan. With regard to previously agreed actions, a review is being undertaken at the moment of all outstanding actions to ensure that they remain relevant, and an approach will be provided to the next audit committee regarding progressing these, whether obviously within this time it may be that services have paused in their implementation of those agreed actions in order to focus on the delivery of the key services, and as internal auditors we would certainly take that into consideration when bringing back any reports to audit committee. Furthermore, as a team we have been undertaking further development work ourselves in internal audit, and we have been considering as a team the common definitions for engagement opinions, which is a recently published CIPFA document. And I'll be bringing a paper to the next audit committee on adopting these for 2020-21 assignments. This is a piece of work that CIPFA has done to try and standardise opinions across the public sector, and it's a really helpful document. And as I say, I will share that with you at the next audit committee, and I would propose that we adopt that again, so that we can share that with partners, so there'll be a consistency of approach for ourselves at Perth Kinross Council and also the Integration Joint Board. Overall, I'd like the committee to note that whilst internal audit planned work has been paused, work will be underway to restart that, and we have been undertaking unplanned work which is consistent with the public sector internal audit standards. We have been providing advice, guidance and support to council services to ensure that its risk management, governance arrangements and internal controls have remained effective and proportionate in these unprecedented times. I'm happy to take any questions from the committee if there's anything that you'd like to ask me about our current workload.
Okay, thank you. During the course of your report there, Jackie, you have twice mentioned the Health and Social Care Partnership, so I think it is right that I should therefore, as Chair of the Integration Joint Board, declare a non-financial interest, and perhaps it would be prudent, if I may, Councillor Donaldson, to ask you to step in at this point in time and to regulate any questions that may come forward on this item on the agenda. And apologies for the lack of notice, but I wasn't aware that Jackie was going to reference that, so I think better safe than sorry. Stuart, would you like to take over?
Oh God!
No, you're working. You're working. You're fine.
There's something. Right? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. On what Jackie has said on her verbal update, then, are there any questions?
If I could just say there's one from Councillor McDade.
Right. Okay. Councillor McDade.
I have two questions. The first one is around COVID-19 and the second one's around Horse-Cross, so you might want to pass the chair back over for my second question, I'm afraid. So, similar to Councillor Drysdale, I shall declare a non-financial interest as a member of the Integration Joint Board, as it was mentioned. My first question is around the reassignment of internal audit staff during COVID-19, and I appreciate Chief Internal Auditor saying that she didn't feel this would compromise staff. However, I'm slightly concerned because I would have felt that perhaps internal audit staff would have been, perhaps it's just my what I had assumed, would have been supporting the council services in the safe delivery, essentially, of a lot of these schemes, such as that had major financial implications, such as the business grant scheme, and as you did touch on the fact that we're going to have a retrospective look at them, but I hope we were also providing ongoing advice about safe implementation of them during the last several months. So I would be appreciative of a bit more detail around where council staff were redeployed to, so that we are aware of that should reports come forward from those areas in the future. My second question is around Horse-Cross, but I'm happy to come back to that.
Come back later, yeah.
Okay, thank you for the question. The work that had been undertaken in relation to the COVID-19 business grants had really from the start getting involved with a degree of assurance over the processes and the staff that were involved with the administration of those grants. As a council, this was undertaken through our Revenues and Benefits Service, who have a great deal of experience in managing applications of this nature, and also have a lot of access to information with regard to the non-domestic rate systems and the likes, and they have an awareness, a very strong awareness of fraud, counter-fraud controls, which they've brought very much to to the administration of these new grants, and certainly I was involved in the beginning, when discussing these, and through providing advice, information as from when I've received it regarding ongoing fraud risks that have arisen during the time that the grants have been administered. With regard to the work that internal auditors have been involved with, it's many and varied, and as part of our work with to ensure that we comply with the public sector internal audit standards, that we undertake regularly and declarations of interest for ourselves as to whether or not we have any potential impairments with undertaking work, and that's a living, breathing document that we use. So if, for example, I was related to, I'm not, but if I was related to a member of staff in community green space, for example, I would have that declared and would hand over any work in relation to green space to another member of the team to finalise. So that's an ongoing document. Now, with regard to the activity that we've been undertaking for during the COVID-19 pandemic, we will be reviewing that and ensuring prior to us starting back on any specific planned internal audits that there is no impairment to our independence and objectivity, and no perceived impairment from the people that we've been working with on core groups which are not planned audits. To give you a flavour of the kind of work that internal audit has been involved with, I've touched on the advice that we've been providing with regard to the COVID-19 grants. There was also other advice and what have you that we were given as to Education and Children's Services at the start with regard to changing controls and establishing systems in relation to the payment of free school meals and other such grants. So there was involvement there from the beginning. With regard to non-audit work, the team have been, one member of the team has been heavily supporting the COVID risk register, the Gold Command throughout the period, and she will continue to do that whilst Gold Command is operating. And while the COVID-19 risk registers are then sort of incorporated into day-to-day business, we've had involvement with the workforce retasking, and provided advice and assurance with regard to workforce management unit within the Health and Social Care Partnership. Also, we've also been involved with, of all things, the Test and Protect. So there's been a number of different areas that we've been involved with, in addition to some work that we have been undertaking, which is of an audit nature as a result of whistleblowing. So we've kept on top of that and have been dealing with anything that's come in that way as well. I don't know if that gives you a sufficient idea as to what COVID-related work we've been doing, Councillor McDade.
Yeah, I think it gives as you say, a flavour of what you've been doing. I think obviously you've talked about some of the controls that are in place there. I think my concern is more about us having assurance, and obviously you're giving us that assurance now, but it's us having assurance that what is being brought before us is not from people who have been involved with these teams, which, as you say, there is controls in place to mitigate against that. So I think that does give us a degree of assurance. I would like to go on to Horsecross question if I can.
Okay, assuming to say again, Councillor McDade. First of all, thank you, Jackie, for that very thorough, detailed response there. Could I say, Councillor McDade, the question on Horsecross, I'll take at the end, but are there any other audit committee members that have questions? And I'm looking at the chat function and I don't see any. No? Right. Then you've got your second question on Horsecross, and here I'm going to pass back to Councillor Drysdale. Okay.
And here I am. Okay. Councillor McDade, over to you.
Okay, thank you. So obviously you mentioned that in the report that you've continued to maintain an overview of the developments in terms of the management of Horsecross following Audit Glasgow's look at the financial management issues last year. My question is partly linked to COVID in terms of what is the internal audit confidence around Horsecross Art's ability to implement the recommendations given the new financial pressures that they now have post-COVID, and obviously we are reading a lot in the media about the staff, etc., that are facing redundancy. So, can you give us confidence that they will be in a position to, or that you feel, you can't necessarily give us that you are perhaps engaging with them to ensure that they are in a position to implement in full the recommendations of that review?
Thank you for that question. The report that would have come up to April's committee highlighted the progress that Perth Kinross Council has made in supporting Horsecross in terms of the oversight of the action plan that had been drawn up to deliver and improvements as a result of the Audit Glasgow report. I was also going to be providing the Glasgow report to the committee back in April, so that you had the full oversight of that and opportunity to explore how internal audit was going to actually take the issues forward. With regard to the current situation, it is one which is very much alive and ongoing. There was an action plan, which, like all internal audit actions, will need to be revisited in terms of both its realism and also the timescales, and whether or not the action plans remain valid. Now, this is something that I'll be working with Fiona Robertson and her team to ensure that these things are being properly managed and there's proper oversight by officers of the council of what is happening in Horsecross. I can't at this point give any assurance that this is taking place, purely because I don't have that information to hand, but it very much is something which will be taken forward into the 2021 by me and my team. Very much so. It's very much a key risk area which will be taken forward.
Just on that point, as a follow-up, Jackie, if I may, could you give us your assessment as the Chief Internal Auditor of the level of risk that Horsecross Arts presents to the Council?
At this point in time, I would be reluctant to give you a specific analysis, as I don't have a lot of information to hand.
I can just come in, Jackie. I mean, I think it's a fair question, Councillor McDade, but I think Jackie has already indicated that she does not have all the information that she would need at this present time to be able to give an answer on which can be minuted and relied upon. So I don't think it's entirely fair on her to put her on the spot on that particular issue. Although, as I say, it is a valid question.
What I would certainly say, Convener and Councillor, is that this is very much on my radar, and it's very much something that I am aware is a risk to the council in terms of delivery of services, and it is something that I am actively taking forward.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you, Jackie. So, if I may, just on that, then, just in trying to summarise what you've said, you know, we are in that often used word unprecedented, uncharted territory of a transition from a national emergency more towards the new normal, if that's another buzz phrase that we have just now. And so the role of internal audit going forward through the remainder of 2021 and beyond is going to be very important. And I think the role of this committee and actually the scrutiny committee also is going to be important in delivering the necessary level of assurance to other elected members and to the people of Perth and Kinross that the management of the local authority and its associated bodies is as robust as it reasonably can have been during that period. And so, I mean, I would want to first of all thank Jackie and her team for the work that has been done to date, and wish her good luck and good fortune in what is going to be a challenging period ahead. But you know, I would, you know, I hope we can speak, she and me, between now and the next meeting in September, and I really want to perhaps involve the convener of scrutiny, Councillor McCole, as well, in a tripartite dialogue. To try and ensure that when you're developing your action plan for this financial year, that it is directed principally towards giving the level of assurance that the people require in terms of the very real concerns that Councillor McDaid has expressed, for example, on Horsecross, you know, and you have mentioned the Health and Social Care Partnership as well. These are very significant items, and we need to make sure that as a committee that we receive reports and are able to assess how things are developing. So that's my own comments, and I would just finally ask if there are any further questions before we close off this item. Okay, no, thank you for your verbal update then, Jackie, and I therefore move on to item 6, the final item on the agenda, which is the internal audit report, annual report for 2019-20. Jackie, over to you again. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. The public sector internal audit standards require the Chief Internal Auditor to provide an annual opinion concluding on the overall adequacy and effectiveness of the arrangements of governance, risk management and internal control, and this report fulfills that requirement. And it's a summary of the work undertaken in 2019-20 relating to Perth and Kinross Council, and most of which will have already been considered by this committee, as it's very much a summary of pulling all that information together. The Council's response to COVID-19 has impacted on finalisation of some assignments, as I've already alluded to. However, sufficient progress has been made in order to arrive at an opinion for 2019-20. The remaining reports, some of which are awaiting presentation, some of which have yet to be finalised, and they will be considered at a future meeting. But the outcomes from those assignments have been taken into consideration when I pulled together this report and arriving at my opinion. In addition to planned work, included within the plan for the year, internal audit were contacted on 31 occasions for advice, for guidance, and this is a significant increase on previous years. And for me, this highlights the role that internal audit now plays within the organisation and its increased value. and that internal audit is in a position to add that value to the decisions and changes within the control environment, and that is a very positive place and mature place for the council to be. The focus of the plan for 2019-20 included thematic assignments, which have been more of a deep dive into some areas of the council activities, which were more cross-cutting, again, across all services. And the actions that are arising from them, from these kind of assignments, have impacted on the statistics which are shown in 2.9 and 2.15. These show an increase in the number of high-risk actions that have arisen, and also on the number of the percentage of weak or moderately weak control objectives. Whilst that may appear to be quite a negative thing, I think that actually it's reassuring to know that actually by undertaking these thematic approaches, we're able to streamline and look at the organisation holistically, and have actually added more value from the work that we've done there in terms of following up on those actions, thinking specifically about the cash collection audit here. That there was a lot came out of that which would not necessarily have been picked up on a more traditional style cash collection in the cash office type audit. So whilst the figures may appear to be a little bit worse, the approach has actually been very effective. The issues arising from Audit Glasgow's review of Horsecross, as we've already discussed, they will remain subject to internal audit involvement going forward. Internal audit follows up on the agreed actions to ensure that they are implemented on a timely basis. In the normal way, this report would include a review of all actions which were due to be completed within 2019-20. However, we've not been able to look at those actions which were due for completion in the final months, so I'm not able to comment on the entirety of the year, which is unfortunate. However, I have been able to state that for all actions which were due to have been completed within the timescales that were examined, they were completed within the year, which is a positive thing. So, in my opinion, the arrangements we have in place for implementing actions and following up on the implementing actions are adequate. Counter-fraud arrangements have been in place throughout the year, and the committee have been informed of the outcomes of the National Fraud Initiative exercise. We will be preparing for a new exercise going forward, but the 2018-19 exercise has now completed. In 2018-19, internal audit at Perth Kinross Council was assessed as fully compliant with the public sector internal auditing standards. This was undertaken, if you recall, by South Ayrshire Council, and these arrangements have continued in 2019-20, so there's no change in our compliance. And now for the matter which is particular interest for this committee. My opinion is stated in section 7 of the report, which is that reasonable reliance can be placed on the Council's risk management and governance arrangements and on the systems of internal control for 2019-20. This opinion has already been seen in the annual governance statement, because this is part and parcel of the evidence which is taken forward there. I'm happy to answer any questions if there's anything specific for this report, but reasonable reliance is a positive. It's a positive rating. So I want to. That's audit speak for. We're doing quite well.
Thank you, Jackie. And we've discussed previously the vocabulary of audit is very understated, and as you say, reasonable. Reasonable is fine, as is my understanding of it. So
absolutely, the paper that I'm hoping to bring to the next audit committee on common definitions is actually very helpful in articulating these quite well. So
Okay.
Hopefully that should give more information on that later.
Okay, no, thanks for that. Okay, do we have any questions? And we do, and we have Councillor McDade with a question.
Thank you, Ms Clark. The report talks about whistleblowing arrangements, which is standard part of your report, and it mentions that there is one matter that was received in March that is still has work to complete on it. Can you give me a feel for how long it normally takes to investigate whistleblowing investigations, and whether this one has been delayed due to COVID, and if so, when it is likely to be concluded?
Thank you. That's a very good question, Councillor. Whistleblowing investigations vary very much from being quite short and sharp and focused on a specific area, which is nice and neat and easy to review and investigate, where that the investigation could be concluded within a matter of days, through to more complex cases which can take a long time to fully get to the bottom of and pull together all information. The whistleblowing case, which is ongoing at the moment, has actually become more of a traditional audit for us. It's and it is ongoing. It was impacted by the COVID-19, partly because it's more than just internal audit that's involved with this particular investigation. There's also HR implications which are being dealt with. However, there is a specific piece of work which internal audit are undertaking as a result of this whistleblowing, which will be reported to committee. And I would hope that that will come to you in the next committee. But as far as how long does a whistleblowing investigation take, as long as it needs, and we would dedicate the sufficient resources to ensure that the investigation is undertaken professionally, competently, and completely.
Okay, thank you. That sounds like that piece of work is bearing fruition, so that's very positive. Thank you.
Thank you for that response, Jackie. That was very reassuring, and especially as long as it takes bit, and it's absolutely critical that everybody understands how seriously Perth Kinross Council takes the whistleblowing activity, and anybody who does come to that service needs to be assured that anything that they bring to your attention is robustly and fully dealt with, and I think we're hearing that loud and clear, so thank you for that. Are there any other questions? There doesn't appear to be. So again, thank you for that, and therefore, if I can just conclude this item, in particular, it is recommended that the committee notes the content of Jackie's report, and specifically the audit opinion at section 7. Can we agree to note this report? Silence is taken as acquiescence and approval. And so we duly have silence, so that is duly noted, Jackie. Thank you. And that concludes this meeting, and apart from a bit of a wobbly start from myself and getting Mr. Wilkie's name wrong, for which apologies again, I think it's going reasonably smoothly. So thank you all for your participation this morning. And I look forward to hopefully real meetings in September. You never know, but failing that, joining you again on a virtual basis at the next meeting. And thank you all for your time this morning. Good morning.